Convoy to Leavenworth, when the feds took over America's first maximum security prison, the train with no name. Hit subscribe now if you want to hear America's most dangerous secrets, because what you're about to learn was locked behind steel and silence for more than a century. The year was 1934. In the pre-dawn darkness outside Union Station in St. Louis, a blacked-out convoy of Pullman cars sat on a remote siding, steam rising from iron wheels like breath from a predator. The manifest said federal property, but nowhere did it list the names of the 37 men chained inside. These are not pickpockets or swindlers. They were the public enemy class, the ones newspapers plastered across front pages as the gangland era reached its bloody climax. Federal agents called the train the Midnight Special, but inside Leavenworth it was already known as the train with no name. At the center of the group sat George Machine Gun Kelly, head shaved by order, wrist cuffed to an iron bar. 2 seats away slumped Frank Jelly Nash, the fugitive whose attempted rescue had triggered the Kansas City massacre a year earlier, for lawmen shot dead in broad daylight. And scattered among them were lesser-known but equally volatile men. Safecrackers from Chicago, anarchists from the East Coast, and a suspected Union bomber still uncharged but too dangerous for any local jail. The Justice Department had ordered them transferred en masse to the U.S. Penitentiary at Leavenworth, Kansas, the government's fortress of discipline. Under protocols so new the ink on them was barely dry. On paper, Leavenworth was just another prison. In reality, it was a seismic shift in American corrections. Built of gray limestone quarried by inmates themselves, its walls rose 30 feet high and 14 feet thick, enclosing cell blocks the length of football fields. Before Alcatraz became synonymous with escape-proof, Leavenworth was the template, an industrial grid of surveillance galleries, steel doors on electric locks, and a command post at every corridor intersection. Even the transport that morning reflected innovation. Sealed prisoner lists known only to a handful of marshals, decoy buses running parallel on the highway to split potential ambushes, and orders for lethal force if anyone tried to intervene. Yet inside the train car the men were anything but subdued. Kelly whispered about a rumored escape crew waiting near Kansas City. Nash boasted he still had friends in federal uniforms. A guard overheard but said nothing, fingers resting on the grip of his revolver. Later investigators would note that the escort team was drawn from 3 separate agencies: Bureau of Investigation men in plain clothes, U.S. Marshals in blue suits, and Army MPs riding shotgun with Thompson submachine guns, because nobody trusted any single outfit after the Kansas City debacle. Every 20 miles, the convoy's route shifted according to prearranged code messages sent by telegraph. A practice so secret even the warden of Leavenworth did not know their exact arrival time. As dawn broke over the Missouri River, the train slowed at a rural crossing. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a freight stop. But a farmer later told a reporter he saw 4 armored cars parked under the cottonwoods, engines running, gun barrels peeking through slits cut in the sides. What he didn't know, and what the Justice Department refused to confirm, was that an informant had warned of a possible rescue attempt somewhere along the line. Whether the threat was real or planted as a test remains unverified. But on that morning, everyone on board believed it. Even the toughest gangsters went silent as the cars clanked over the switch and the guards locked the doors. Hours later, when the convoy finally rolled through the limestone gates of Leavenworth, the warden personally counted each prisoner as they were led down the gangway in leg irons. One was missing. The official records still list a counting error for the discrepancy. But a retired marshal would later say, off the record, that a seat on the train had been left empty on purpose. A decoy, he claimed, to confuse anyone tracking the transport. Others whisper that a real inmate vanished somewhere between St. Louis and Leavenworth, and that the Bureau buried the truth to save face. No one has ever produced proof either way. What is certain is that by the time the gates slammed shut that afternoon, a new era of federal power had begun. But the mystery of the missing man from that first great convoy would cast a long shadow. over Leavenworth, over federal prisoner transport, and over every future attempt to challenge the government's iron grip. The missing man. By the time the last iron gate of Leavenworth clanged shut that afternoon, every man on the transport was officially in custody, at least on paper. But when the warden cross-checked the arrival manifest with the sealed order from Washington, a single name appeared without a matching body. The line was blank except for 3 letters, C-47. No agent present could explain it. Behind the scenes, the Bureau had been experimenting with new security protocols after the Kansas City massacre. Sealed codes, rotating escorts, compartmentalized information. Each escort only knew its slice of the plan. In theory, it made infiltration impossible. In practice, it created blind spots. Nobody on that train car could say with absolute certainty who had been chained where, because nobody was supposed to. That was the point. And now the point had become a problem. Inside Leavenworth, tension rose like heat from the limestone walls. Rumors spread among the new arrivals that one of their own had slipped the chain somewhere on the prairie. Some whispered that George Kelly's wife had bribed a guard. Others claimed the missing man was never a gangster at all, but an undercover federal operative sent to test the new Convoy system. The prison grapevine magnified each story until guards were searching cells that hadn't even been assigned yet. In the warden's office, a crisis meeting was underway. U.S. Marshals demanded a lockdown. Bureau agents insisted nothing was amiss. C-47 was a decoy slot, they said, inserted to protect the identities of high-risk prisoners. But an Army MP on the escort team swore he'd seen a 4th prisoner chained to Kelly's row who wasn't on any list. He even described him, mid-30s, cropped hair, faded Navy tattoo on his left hand. That description matched a real person. A suspected explosives courier for a Chicago mob crew arrested 2 weeks earlier and held under an alias at a St. Louis jail. If that courier had indeed vanished between St. Louis and Leavenworth, the implications were staggering. Not only would it mean a breach of the government's new, escape-proof transfer system, it could also trigger a retaliatory war between rival gangs who believed their enemies had pulled off a rescue. Within days, unconfirmed reports surfaced of machine gun fire outside a Kansas City safe house linked to Nash's old crew. No connection was proven, but the timing was enough to keep federal brass awake at night. Meanwhile, inside Leavenworth, the new inmates were being processed one by one. Mugshots taken under harsh electric lights, fingerprints rolled onto cards, medical exams perfunctory and cold. Kelly kept his head down, but Nash smirked at every guard, as if he already knew something they didn't. In the mess hall, a scrawled note passed from hand to hand, promising a second train and a way out. Whether the note was genuine or bait planted by investigators remains unconfirmed to this day. Investigators combed the rail line. Farmers along the route were questioned. Telegraph offices were ordered to surrender all code messages from that morning. Nothing surfaced. No witnesses, no bodies, no ransom notes. Only a ghostly paper trail, a requisition for one additional prisoner meal filed at the St. Louis jailhouse kitchen and then crossed out. The Bureau quietly opened a classified file under the heading Leavenworth Transport Anomaly. Inside, agents compiled every rumor, every discrepancy. Some pages remain redacted in the National Archives, even now. What survives shows a government scrambling to plug holes it refused to admit existed. Tightening escort rosters, replacing local marshals with hand-picked federal men, and drawing up contingency plans for high-risk mass transfers that would evolve into today's convict transportation system. But on the ground in 1934, the mystery wasn't a policy case study. It was a live fuse. Every man in cell block B had a theory. Every guard feared a riot sparked by a whisper. And the warden had a decision to make: tell Washington the truth, that someone might have vanished, or accept the Bureau's explanation that C-47 was a phantom entry and move on. He chose silence. 3 nights later, a guard making rounds near the old shoe factory wing heard tapping. Faint, methodical, like Morse code, coming from a maintenance shaft sealed since before the convoy arrived. When he called for backup and pried open the hatch, the shaft was empty. Only a torn strip of prison khaki lay on the concrete, damp with sweat, and scratched into the wall a single word, soon. Inside the walls, Leavenworth cell blocks were supposed to be impregnable, long rows of steel and stone that echoed like cathedrals when a single boot struck the floor. In the days after the convoy arrived, the fortress began to feel porous. Every shift change brought new rumors. Every meal line became an exchange of coded glances. The federal government's showcase prison was turning into a locked-in crime scene. On the morning of the fourth day, Warden Biddle received a telegram stamped urgent, Justice Department, instructing him to conduct internal review of all spaces adjacent to the maintenance shafts. It was the first time Washington even acknowledged that the anomaly might be more than a bookkeeping trick. Biddle called in his most trusted captain, Arthur Kerr, a veteran guard known for breaking up knife fights barehanded. Together, they descended into the bowels of the old factory wing with two armed MPs and a flashlight that cut a trembling beam across walls etched with decades of graffiti. They found no prisoner. But in a crawl space behind a rusted grate lay a stash of contraband. Hand-drawn maps of the prison service tunnels, two smuggled hacksaw blades, and a coded ledger of names and numbers that matched neither commissary accounts nor any known gang cipher. The ledger was still damp with ink. Someone inside had been planning something long before the convoy arrived. Meanwhile, the inmates from the train with no name were being shuffled into work assignments. Kelly landed in the print shop. Nash was put on kitchen duty. Others went to the quarry, the laundry, the yard. The shift gave investigators a chance to listen. Prisoners talk when they think they're moving rocks or folding sheets, and agents planted informants among them. One of those informants, an ex-safecracker named Little Tommy, later told a grand jury he'd overheard a plan to finish the job from the inside, meaning an escape or an assassination. No one knew which. The Justice Department dispatched a young bureau agent named Edgar O'Neill to lead the covert inquiry inside the prison. O'Neill posed as a new disciplinary officer, walking the tiers with a clipboard, memorizing faces. He had instructions to locate C-47, or the people using that name as a ghost. Within a week, he identified 3 suspects among the new arrivals who matched the Navy tattoo description. But when he ordered their cells searched, all 3 had alibis backed by guards and paperwork. At the same time, a new tension crept into the staff ranks. Kerr began receiving anonymous notes under his office door. "Stop digging or you'll be next." One night his tires were slashed in the employee lot, a first for the prison. Whether it was a bluff by inmates or a leak from his own staff remained unproven, but it rattled him enough to request reassignment. The warden refused. Then, in the middle of a thunderstorm, a kitchen worker discovered a slip of paper baked into a loaf of bread. It contained a series of numbers and a crude drawing of the factory wing with an arrow pointing to the east perimeter. Investigators traced the handwriting to Frank Nash, but he denied everything. Kelly swore he'd never seen the paper. No one could explain how it got into the dough. The following morning, a guard on the tower spotted a flash of white near the east wall, a makeshift signal made from torn sheets, fluttering between the razor wire. By the time a patrol reached the spot, the fabric was gone, replaced by a single playing card stuck under a stone, the ace of spades. Whether it was a warning, a signature, or a taunt, nobody knew. But to the press, which had begun sniffing around Leavenworth after a leak about a missing convict, it was the perfect symbol. Headlines screamed, "Ghost inmate taunts feds," even though no official source confirmed any escape. Inside Washington, the case shifted from embarrassment to potential scandal. The Bureau quietly widened its net, interviewing trained personnel, rail yard workers, even telegraph operators. Still no trace. But the coded ledger from the crawl space kept yielding new patterns under analysis, hinting at a timetable of future movements, maybe even a second convoy. And then came the incident that made it impossible to hide. During an evening head count in cell block D, a guard noticed a door slightly ajar. Inside the cell, the bunk was empty but still warm. On the floor lay a manila envelope stamped with a single mark, C-47. Inside was a photograph of Leavenworth's main gate taken from the inside looking out, a view no outsider should have had. If the photograph was real, someone inside the fortress had access to cameras, chemicals, and a plan. If it was planted, someone was orchestrating a psychological war against the government from behind bars. Either way, the myth of the missing man had just evolved into a live threat inside America's first maximum security prison, the Convoy Shadow. By the end of that first month, Leavenworth had become a pressure cooker. Guards were exhausted from double shifts. Inmates were restless from constant searches, and Washington was demanding an answer before the press turned a rumor into a scandal. The sealed file marked Leavenworth Transport Anomaly now filled an entire drawer in the warden's safe. Inside, it sat the photograph of the gate, the coded ledger from the crawl space, and a growing pile of anonymous notes bearing the mark C-47. On a cold morning in November 1934, Bureau Agent Edgar O'Neill received a telegram summoning him to a clandestine meeting in Kansas City with a senior Justice Department official. There, in a smoke-filled back room of a hotel, O'Neill was handed a file that changed everything. According to these documents, declassified only decades later, the C-47 entry on the transport manifest had not been a prisoner at all. It was a covert designation for a federal operative inserted into the convoy to test security after the Kansas City massacre. The operative's true mission: pose as a high-risk inmate, watch for leaks, and identify any staff aiding escape plots. But something had gone wrong. The operative had never reported in after the train left St. Louis. Whether he had been compromised, defected, or eliminated was still unconfirmed. The coded ledger found in the crawl space matched not a gang cipher, but an internal bureau field code used for signaling locations and times. Someone inside the prison, either the operative or a copycat, had been leaving those messages. Armed with this knowledge, O'Neill returned to Leavenworth under cover of night. He and Captain Kerr led a team into the factory wing, retracing the path from the photograph. At a false wall behind a storage rack, they found a narrow shaft leading to an old ventilation tunnel sealed since the 1920s. In the dust lay a single revolver, oiled and wrapped, and a small notebook containing sketches of the prison's interior along with initials of guards suspected of smuggling and contraband. Several of those initials belonged to real staff members on duty the day of the convoy. Deeper in the tunnel, under a grate barely wide enough for a man to crawl, they found him. Not an inmate, but a gaunt figure in a tattered guard's jacket, badge removed. He had been living off stolen rations for weeks, moving at night, leaving notes and signals to test who would respond. His name, confirmed later through bureau records, was Walter Cray, code designation C-47. He was not planning an escape. He was documenting how easily one could happen. Cray's explanation, once debriefed, was stranger than the rumors. He claimed he had gone to ground deliberately after sensing a leak among the escort team and fearing for his life. By disappearing into Leavenworth's underbelly, he could watch not just the inmates, but the staff, some of whom were indeed selling information to outside gangs. His plan was to surface only after compiling evidence. But as the panic escalated, his signals were misread as taunts or escape plans, feeding the legend of a ghost inmate. In a closed-door session in Washington, Justice Department officials faced a dilemma: publicize the incident and risk undermining faith in federal prisoner transport, or bury it and quietly overhaul the system. They chose the latter. Cray was reassigned under a new identity. Several guards were dismissed quietly. The coded convoy protocols were rewritten from the ground up, becoming the foundation of what is now the U.S. Marshal Service's Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, JPATS, known today as Con Air. Officially, no inmate ever escaped from the train with no name that day. Unofficially, the legend of the missing man lived on in Leavenworth's folklore, retold by inmates and guards alike as proof that even the strongest walls have shadows. Some still believe a real prisoner vanished and the Bureau invented C-47 as a cover. Others see it as the birth of modern federal transport security. The truth, buried under layers of redacted files and fading memories, may never be completely known. What is certain is that Leavenworth's early convoys changed everything. Decoy vehicles, seal manifests, cross-jurisdictional escorts all became standard because of those first high-risk transfers. The image of a lone man vanishing into the heart of America's most secure prison became a cautionary tale whispered on every future bus and plane carrying federal inmates. And for viewers a century later, the story is more than a footnote. It's a reminder of how power, secrecy, and fear can build myths that outlive their creators. Whether C-47 was a phantom, a hero, or a fugitive, his shadow still rides every convoy. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.